Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see me okay. Thanks for the invite, and also I should really sincerely apologize for not being able to join you earlier or indeed later this afternoon. This is due to some emergency teaching cover that I have volunteered for, and this is what's keeping me essentially away from you today, much to my dismay. So what I plan to do today departs a little, I guess, from the theme of impact, strictly speaking, but it focuses instead on the state regulation of Black music genres. So what my research and whatever impact it may have actually hides in the background of my presentation, but I nevertheless hope that it will still be audible, to anyone who wishes to attune themselves to, I guess, the impact of such research into such topics. So what my presentation will look at is at how and why Black, or better, Afro-diasporic music cultures have always been suppressed, policed, and tried as guilty of the crime of causing crime, or at least glorifying and glamorizing it, as is often the charge. So to say anything worthwhile about it all, I would like to situate this reality in its proper historical context, however briefly, by demonstrating how and why Black music genres have been the target of the legal penal system for so long, while also reflecting on all this in the light of a contemporary example, namely UK drill music, by comparing it to earlier Black music genres, namely Trinidadian calypso or calypso, as a way of illustrating patterns of continuity in the policing against Black modes of creative expression. Finally, I intend to end my presentation with some brief reflections on the importance of Black music as an undermined resource for thinking about the politics of policing from the era of colonial slavery to the present day, in ways that I think are very consistent with CUMiN's effort to reintroduce hip-hop as a tool for education, research, and knowledge exchange too. So let us begin at the beginning with the banning of African drumming and dancing in Britain's colonies in the Caribbean, Africa, and that other former British colony, the US, where slave patrol legislation was introduced, and I quote, to prevent all caballings amongst Negroes by dispersing of them when drumming or playing, unquote. Such statutes, like the one that I just quoted, were of a piece with similar ordinances that targeted, I quote, the tumultuous gatherings of the Negroes, unquote, and banned, quote, Negro frolics, unquote. Further south, British colonial rule in the Caribbean became almost synonymous with police regulations that, as historian Elsa Gouveia notes, lay at the very heart of the slave system. So much so, Gouveia continues, that without them the system became impossible to maintain. Such police regulations were aimed at the pursuit, capture, suppression, and punishment of the enslaved, who were, and I quote from Gouveia, forbidden to beat drums and blow horns, since these were means of communication which might be used to help runaways. All such activities were dangerous too, as means of concerting uprisings, which was another reason for the existence of these laws. A characteristic example is the 1787 Consolidated Act, especially Clause 21, which was introduced to enable the government of slaves, and I quote from the Act, and prevent, also quoting from the Act, rebellions concerted ad Negro dance, unquote. Similar legislation across the Caribbean outlawed religious rites and ceremonies like Obeya, prohibited drum dances like Kalenda or Kalinda, Belair and Bongo, and suppressed cultural festivals like John Canoe parades in Jamaica and carnival or Camboulay processions in Trinidad, for the potential, as ever, to function as mechanisms of rebellion cited in culture, as Sylvia Winter reminds us. Such regulatory measures were also enforced under colonial rule in Africa, through bans on drums of African origin in all types of public meetings, and I'm quoting again from a relevant statute, and prohibitions, quote again, on playing objectionable native tunes, unquote. Banning drumming, dancing, and musical performance that accompanied religious rites and cultural festivals, however, did not end with the abolition of colonial slavery. Rather, it continued apace, but morphed into police harassment of Trinidadian calypso, or calypso, and West African asiko music, name two examples. In Britain, carnival celebrations, reggae sound systems, garage, bashment, and grime music faced similar suppression, bringing echoes of the colonial plantation archipelago closer to Britain's post-colonial shores. Even a few centuries and shocking headlines about a new menacing rap subgenre, UK drill, have been exploding on mainstream media, warning respectable, law-abiding consumers of news media about this demonic, nihilistic soundtrack to London's murders that has been so often blamed for the rise of knife crime in Britain's major cities. As such, UK drill has been the target of various discriminatory and unjust legal penal interventions that turn Black cultural activity into a legally punishable offence. These include criminal behaviour orders, gang injunctions, suspended prison sentences, and the monitoring and removal of drill music videos from YouTube. The London Metropolitan Police has even formed a drill music translation cadre consisting of police officers who act as rap expert witnesses, decoding lyrics and translating them into evidence for the prosecution. Similarly, the Crown Prosecution Service has published decision-making guidance which makes direct references to drill music as evidence of gang affiliation and bad character to establish joint enterprise convictions. All this would be well and good, provided that hard, tangible evidence could connect drill to criminal wrongdoing. Yet, where drill lyrics or videos are adduced as evidence in court, they often have no direct connection to the offence charged, as case law evidence reveals. Such measures, therefore, are only justified because drill music is pursued as dangerous by legal penal system functionaries without being able to substantiate what amounts to little more than pure suspicion. In the absence of any real evidential weight that could lend some credence to such penal hysteria, the only evidence that exists actually points to the discriminatory, illiberal, and unjust logic, nature, and outcomes of such legal penal tactics. This is not to deny, justify, or condone any violence in some, but by no means all, drill music, which rarely amounts to anything more than isolated incidents anyway. Rather, it is to note that this is not what all drill is, or indeed that this is all that drill is, while also stressing that it is selectively criminalized in ways that prompt more questions about policing and racialized state-sanctioned violence than they do about the danger that drill music ostensibly poses. To further illustrate how the policing against UK drill music, genre-specific though it may be, actually bears the hallmarks of the longer history of regulating and controlling Black music genres, I would like to compare the suppression of calypso music in 1930s Trinidad with that of UK drill music today. So I want to take you to 1934 in sun-kissed Trinidad, and in a period where calypsonians sharpen their minds, flex their muscles, and ready their tongues to showcase their musical poetry in calypso tents during the carnival season. And during that season, the Theatre and Dance Halls Ordinance comes into force, setting up the benighted police force and an alien high-ranking colonial officer as the supreme authority over calypso, as Attila the Hun Calypsonian himself commented with much irony. And the powers that were given to such colonial regulation of calypso music also involved banning records and forbidding calypsonians to sing without a license, duly signed by the police officer superintending the district, on the grounds that the characteristic attitude of calypso as a combination of barbed wit, biting satire, and ridicule are essential, or rather amount to insulting individuals and certain sections of the community. So attempting to cleanse carnival festivities from what the authorities perceived as lowly, vulgar, and perverse lyrics, the police and the colonial secretary, who had the power to enforce such regulations, could effectively determine who could sing and what they could sing about, while also imposing sanctions that put calypsonians in a position of legal and economic disadvantage through the banning of their live performances and records. Worse still, such judgments were made by people with a questionable understanding of the subtleties, innuendos, insinuations, and nuances connected with this art medium. Nearly 9 decades later, in the British Isles, the police target drill rappers with criminal behavior orders that require artists to inform the police before publishing the music online and warn them before any planned live performance, as was the case with drill group 1011 and drill rapper Digga D. Such restrictions essentially amount to banning drillers from sharing their music with their audience at the discretion of police officers, who routinely use drill music videos as evidence of criminal wrongdoing in court proceedings, who also act as expert witnesses and even question the artistic merit of drill, despite their own lack of formal qualifications or sufficient knowledge with which to judge such matters, if they ever should. So, having offered a flickering snapshot of how Black music genres have been racially criminalized over time, the question of why this is so becomes urgent. So let me address it directly by arguing, perhaps controversially, that what is criminalized are not Black music genres per se, but what they symbolize, namely the physical and cultural presence of Black people as permanent suspects, whose forms of creative expression are perceived and policed as aesthetically out of tune, culturally out of place, and politically out of order. What is treated as suspicious, dangerous, and inadmissible to the national self-portrait, therefore, is not the discordant sound of Black music, but the disorderly presence of Black people whose very existence in the social world is apprehended as a crime through legal penal tactics that blame an entire music genre, its producers and audiences, for glorifying, glamorizing, and even engaging in violent crime. Finally, I want to end on a more positive note, having bombarded you with pretty depressing discussions and details about the racial politics of law and order in contemporary Britain. So having enlisted music as a tool for knowledge production to share my thoughts with you, perhaps I don't need to elaborate on this too much, other than stressing the importance of thinking with and listening carefully to what insights Black music can offer as sonic testimony and a sonic critique of colonialism, racism, structural inequalities, and other forms of violence. I therefore want to close by quoting legendary rap veteran KRS-One, who is always worth quoting as an example of how just a few seconds spent with rap can tell you as much as I've told you more briefly and more intelligently than I could ever aspire to. Not only did KRS-One educate us about how the colonial overseer who rode in the plantation becomes the metropolitan officer who patrols the nation in Sound of the Police, he also elaborated in Hip Hop versus Rap that I'm stolen property, kicking the flavor to society. Police be clocking me, but logically they got to be, because they were taught that serious poetry would come from Socrates. But that ain't it. In '94, I'll keep the hit. Finishing this talk at the beginning of 2022, I'm inclined to believe that KRS-One again hit the right note. So I hope that we will all listen, in the additional hope that my presentation also gave us something to think about and something to treasure too, namely music. Thank you all for listening.